The royal court was alive with whispers, their golden hall filled with nobles and commanders dressed in jewels and medals. They had gathered for what was meant to be a day of peace, a ceremony where honor and tradition would shine above the storms of politics. Yet tension in the air was heavy, as if the walls themselves carried the memory of battles fought too recently to forget. At the heart of the gathering stood the monarch, tall and dignified, a man whose crown carried not only gold, but the weight of a troubled kingdom. His eyes swept across the hall, meeting the stares of loyal subjects, suspicious rivals, and weary soldiers. Everyone waited for the moment when peace would finally feel real. But peace had never come easily. Only weeks earlier, war had threatened to tear the kingdom apart. Armies clashed on the borders, and families feared for their lives. The sound of marching boots and the smoke of burning villages had been all too common. The people prayed for an end, and when the royal army stood victorious, they thought relief had come. Yet victory carried its own wounds. The court now had to heal divisions, show unity, and give the people hope that sacrifice had not been in vain. Into this atmosphere walked the young royal woman, her presence catching every eye. Draped in velvet and gold, a crown of jewels resting upon her head, she moved with calm grace, though her heart carried storms unseen. She had lived through the same war, watching soldiers leave and never return, listening to the cries of mothers and children. She had seen the cost of power, and she understood that today was not just ceremony, it was a test. The hall fell quiet as she stepped forward. The nobles whispered no more. Even the guards, stiff and silent in their armor, seemed to hold their breath. She was not just a princess, nor just a symbol of beauty. She was the one many saw as hope, a bridge between the rulers and the people. Who suffered most? The monarch nodded for her to approach. His expression was unreadable, yet his eyes carried years of weight. Every step she took toward him echoed like a drumbeat of destiny. Those watching knew something more than tradition was unfolding. They had come to see a ritual, but what they witnessed felt larger than ceremony. It felt like history itself was being written in their presence. At the center of the hall, before the throne, she lowered herself to her knees. The velvet of her cloak spread across the marble floor like a river of deep crimson. Slowly, she bowed her head, pressing her hand against her lips as if in prayer. It was not a gesture rehearsed for pride or performance, it was real. The weight of the war, the suffering of the people, the scars on the land, all seemed to pour into that single bow. The silence was total. 1,000 eyes watched, yet no one moved, no one spoke. It was as though time itself had stopped. In that quiet moment, she carried not only her own grief, but the grief of an entire nation. Every noble, every soldier, every servant in the hall felt it. Her act was more powerful than words, more moving than speeches. The monarch looked down at her, and for the first time in many years, his stern expression softened. His chest rose with a long breath as he felt something he had not allowed himself to feel, human sorrow. His eyes grew wet, and though he tried to hide it, the court saw the truth. The king himself was moved to tears. A murmur spread through the hall, not of scandal but of reverence. The people there would speak of this moment for generations. A bow had shaken a throne, not with rebellion but with humility, honesty, and a quiet plea for peace. The courtiers leaned forward, some pressing hands to their hearts, others closing their eyes as if in prayer. The generals, hardened by war, sat straighter in their chairs, reminded that their swords had meaning only if there was something worth protecting. And among the common people who had been allowed into the gallery, tears fell freely, for they felt represented in that single act. As she lifted her head slowly, her eyes glistened. She did not look at the jewels, the power, or the throne. She looked at the monarch, and in her gaze was not challenge but plea. A plea for him to remember that crowns mean nothing without compassion. The king lowered his head slightly in return, a gesture unthinkable only a day before. The hall gasped. softly, for it was not just her bow that changed the day, it was his reply. And in that silent exchange, the seeds of a new chapter began to grow. The war had ended, but what would come after was still unwritten. The silence in the hall lingered. Even after the royal woman rose slowly from her bow. Her movements were graceful, but everyone could see her trembling hands, the weight of emotion she carried. The monarch's eyes, still glistening, followed her as she stood upright. That moment felt like a bridge between ruler and people, fragile but powerful. Around the hall, nobles exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as though her humility reminded them of their own pride. Others bowed their heads in respect, realizing that she had spoken without words what none of them had dared to say. The suffering of the people, the grief of war, the cost of ambition, it all demanded recognition. Among the crowd stood the commanders who had fought on the battlefield. Their polished armor reflected the golden light of the chandeliers above. These men had led thousands into battle, but their eyes now betrayed uncertainty. A princess kneeling had done what no blade could pierce the heart of the court. Monarch raised his hand slightly, and the hall grew still again. His voice, when he spoke, was lower and softer than many had ever heard before. "Her bow," he said, pausing as though to find the right words, "is not to me alone. It is to every soul that carried this kingdom through fire. Let it be remembered." Gasps spread across the court, and whispers rose quickly. For a king to admit such a thing was rare, almost unthinkable. Yet his words did not weaken his authority. Instead, they deepened it. He had acknowledged the truth that everyone knew, but no one had dared to say out loud that the power of the throne existed. Because of the sacrifices of the people, the princess turned slightly, her eyes sweeping the hall. She saw soldiers with bandaged arms, mothers who had lost sons, and nobles who carried guilt behind jeweled smiles. For a moment, her gaze locked with theirs, and they felt seen. Many bowed their heads back to her, a silent exchange of respect. But not all welcomed the moment. At the edge of the gathering sat a group of lords whose loyalty had always been fragile. Their whispers grew sharp, their eyes cold. One leaned close to another, his words bitter. "If the king grows soft, the realm will fracture." His companion gave a dark nod. For them, compassion was weakness, and weakness was opportunity. The young woman, sensing the tension, steadied herself. She had not meant to create division, yet she knew that true unity always exposed those who sought power for themselves. She remained calm, her expression serene but strong. She understood that this day was not the end of the war, only the beginning of another battle, one fought in hearts and minds rather than with steel. The king, as though hearing the whispers in the shadows, straightened his posture. His voice rang louder, carrying to every corner of the hall. "Let this court never forget the cost of silence," he declared. "If we fail to honor the pain of our people, we are not rulers but pretenders." His words struck like thunder, silencing all whispers. The nobles clapped cautiously at first, then stronger as the words sank into their hearts. Some applauded with pride, others with fear, knowing the king had drawn a line they could not ignore. Princess stepped back slightly, allowing him the full space of the throne. Yet as she looked at him, her heart beat fast. For in his softened eyes she saw something else, not just the monarch, not just the ruler, but a man carrying wounds he never allowed the world to see. His tears had been brief, but they had revealed his humanity. And in that humanity, she sensed a new path for the kingdom. The people in the gallery, those common folk allowed into the hall, could not contain their emotions. Some wept openly. Others clasped hands together as if in prayer. They would carry this moment back to their villages, back to the streets where hope had been dying. They would speak of it in hushed tones, then in bold voices that the royal house had remembered them. But in the shadows beyond the golden light, danger stirred. The lords who despised weakness whispered again, their eyes fixed on the princess. They saw her as the spark that had lit this change, the symbol that could either unite or topple them. One muttered, "She kneels today, but tomorrow she may rise above us all." Their ambition twisted into silent threats. The princess, unaware of the full depth of their schemes, felt a chill run through her, as though instinct warned her of unseen storms. Still, she stood with quiet strength, her jeweled crown catching the light. She had chosen her path, and though it was filled with risk, she would not step back. The monarch leaned closer to her, his voice low but steady. "You have reminded me of what I must be," he said, words meant for her alone. Her heart trembled at his confession, yet she met his eyes firmly, nodding once. The ceremony was far from finished, but everyone knew that history had already been written. A bow had broken the silence, a tear had shaken the throne, and the kingdom stood at the edge of a new chapter. And in that hall of gold and shadow, both hope and danger took root together. Asterisk. The echoes of applause still lingered in the grand hall when the monarch rose from his throne. His movements were deliberate, every step heavy with meaning. The court watched in silence, sensing that something more was coming, something beyond ritual. The air felt charged, as if the stones of the palace themselves leaned forward to listen. The princess stood quietly at his side, her head bowed slightly, her hands clasped in front of her. She did not seek attention, yet every gaze returned to her. She had become the symbol of what everyone felt but could not say, a reminder that humility had the power to command respect in ways crowns and swords never could. The monarch raised his hand, and the crowd hushed. His voice, though steady, carried a tremor that revealed his struggle. "We fought a war not to conquer, but to survive," he began. "And survival without compassion is no victory at all. Today, in her bow, I have seen the truth we must hold." His words washed across the hall like a tide. Some nobles nodded, others frowned. The lords who plotted in the shadows shifted uneasily, though their eyes never left the princess. She had become the bridge between the throne and the people, but also a threat to their own ambitions. A murmur rose at the back of the chamber, where commoners filled the gallery. A woman's voice, raw with emotion, broke the silence. "Bless her," she whispered, and the words carried through the quiet until many repeated them. Soon, the gallery was alive with whispers of blessing, soft but insistent, like a prayer. The monarch paused, his eyes lifting toward the gallery. He seemed struck by the sound, as though he had not expected such unity from those who often went unheard. Slowly he nodded, acknowledging them, and the gallery responded with quiet cheers, restrained yet filled with hope, but not all hearts softened. Among the nobles, one lord with silver hair and sharp eyes leaned forward, his lips curling into a cold smile. "The court forgets," he muttered under his breath to those near him, "that symbols can be broken. And once broken, faith collapses." His companions gave him slight nods, their silence more dangerous than words. The princess sensed unease ripple through the hall. She lifted her gaze, her eyes meeting those of the people in the gallery. For a moment, it felt as if she drew strength from them, as if their quiet blessing became her shield. She stood straighter, the jewels in her crown glinting in the golden light. She did not speak, but her silence carried weight, her presence stronger than any speech could be. The monarch turned back to her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You have awakened something today," he said. "It cannot be undone." His tone carried both gratitude and warning, for he knew that change often drew enemies faster than friends. The hall resumed its ceremony, though the air was thick with unspoken thoughts. Gifts were exchanged, honors bestowed, yet all of it felt secondary compared to the moment already past. The bow had become the story, the gesture that would not be forgotten. Every noble, every servant, every soldier present knew they would tell it again and again. Later, as the gathering began to disperse, the princess walked slowly down the marble steps. Her gown trailed behind her like a river of velvet, and whispers followed in her wake. Some whispered in awe, others in doubt, and a few in anger. She could feel each one, though none were spoken directly to her face. At the edge of the hall, she paused. A young soldier, his arm still bound in bandages from battle, bowed deeply before her. "You gave us honor today," he said softly. His voice trembled, but his eyes shone with respect. Her lips curved into a faint smile, touched by his words. She placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "It was your courage that carried us," she replied. The soldier's eyes widened, and he lowered his head again, tears slipping down his cheeks. But as she turned away, her eyes caught the cold stare of the silver-haired lord. He did not bow nor smile. Instead, his gaze followed her with silent promise, a promise of resistance, perhaps even betrayal. She felt a chill creep down her spine, though she did not let it show. Night fell upon the palace, but the days, events did not rest. Across the kingdom, word of the bow spread swiftly. In taverns and markets, people spoke of the moment with awe. "She bowed, and the king wept," they said, voices filled with wonder. To the common folk, it became a story of hope, a sign that perhaps the rulers had not forgotten them. In darkened chambers, however, whispers turned venomous. The lords who feared change gathered in secret. The silver-haired lord stood among them, his voice low and sharp. "If her influence grows unchecked," he warned, "she will reshape the throne itself. And that we cannot allow." Plans began to form in the shadows, dangerous and silent. While the kingdom celebrated hope, seeds of conflict took root unseen. The princess, unaware of the full storm building against her, looked out from her chamber balcony into the night. The stars above were bright, scattered like diamonds across the dark sky. She pressed a hand to her chest, whispering a prayer that the hope she had sparked would not fade. But deep within her heart, she knew that peace was never given freely. It had to be defended, not only with swords, but with truth, courage, and sacrifice. And as the moonlight bathed the palace, she understood that her bow was only the beginning. The dawn after the ceremony painted the palace in hues of soft gold and crimson. Servants moved quickly through the marble corridors, carrying trays of food, arranging flowers, and polishing the endless decorations. Yet beneath the beauty, a current of tension pulsed like an unseen river. The kingdom had been stirred awake by one act of humility, and its echo refused to fade. In the villages, people spoke of nothing else. Farmers, merchants, and soldiers shared the tale by firelight, how the princess had bowed, how silence had fallen, and how even the monarch's eyes had glistened. To the people, it was a sign that their pain had not been ignored, that their leaders were not made of stone. For the first time in years, hope felt alive. But inside the palace, hope was not welcomed by all. In a shadowed chamber deep within the walls, the silver-haired lord gathered with his allies. Around a heavy oak table, their voices stayed low. But the venom in their words was sharp. "She moves the people with silence," one lord muttered, his jeweled rings clinking against his goblet. "If they see her as their voice, they will follow her above the rest of us." The silver-haired lord leaned forward, his eyes cold as steel. "The king is already swayed. Yesterday, he spoke as if her bow had guided his hand. Do you not see? She's becoming more than symbol, she's becoming power." A murmur of agreement filled the chamber. Ambition clashed with fear, each man weighing his chances. Some sought to use her influence for themselves, others plotted to break it entirely. But all understood one truth: if left unchecked, she could change the balance of the realm forever. Meanwhile, the princess moved quietly through her duties. She did not seek praise, yet everywhere she walked, servants and guards greeted her with new warmth. They looked at her differently now, not only as royalty, but as someone who carried their burdens in her heart. She answered them with gentle words, her presence calm, her smile soft. But behind her grace, unease lingered. That evening, she was summoned to the monarch's private chamber. The king stood near the window, the fading light casting long shadows across his face. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable. "You changed the court yesterday," he said slowly. "And perhaps you changed me." His voice held both gratitude and something heavier, a warning unspoken. She lowered her head. "I only bowed, sire." "No," he replied firmly, his gaze steady. "You reminded us of what we had forgotten. But such reminders come with danger." He paced the room, his hands clasped behind his back. "The nobles who hunger for power will not forgive being humbled. They will see you as threat." Her heart tightened, but she did not waver. "If my gesture brought hope to the people, then I will bear their anger. Better their anger than their silence." The king studied her, and for the briefest moment, pride flickered in his eyes. Yet it was shadowed by fear, for her safety, for the realm. "Do not underestimate them," he warned. "They strike not with swords in daylight, but with whispers in the dark." As she left his chamber, his words echoed in her mind. The corridors seemed longer, the torchlight dimmer. She could almost feel unseen eyes following her steps. That night, while the palace slept, the silver-haired lord walked alone through the gardens. The moonlight silvered his features, sharpening the lines of his face. He paused near the fountain, his reflection trembling in the water. "She kneels, the king bends, and the people rise," he muttered. "If we allow it, the throne will no longer belong to us." From the shadows, another noble approached. "What would you have us do?" The Lord's smile was thin, sharp. "We test her strength. We find her weakness. And when the people see she is not what they believe, their hope will break." The plan took root that night, hidden in whispers and shadows. Yet the princess, unaware of the danger forming against her, continued her quiet path. She spent her days among the wounded soldiers, sitting by their bedsides, listening to their stories of loss and courage. She walked through the kitchens, thanking servants for their labor. She visited the stables, speaking with stable boys and riders. Every act, small and genuine, spread her image further among the people. And as the kingdom's love for her deepened, so too did the nobles' fear. On the 7th day after the bow, the court gathered again for council. The silver-haired lord rose to speak, his voice smooth, his words wrapped in courtesy but laced with poison. "We honor the princess for her humility," he said, bowing slightly. "Yet humility alone cannot guide a realm. Symbols are fragile, and when symbols break, the people turn to anger." His words hung heavy in the hall. Some nodded in agreement, others frowned. The monarch's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. The princess, seated near him, met the lord's gaze with calm silence. She saw his game, though she did not yet know its full shape. The court was no longer a place of celebration. It was becoming a battlefield, one fought with words sharper than any sword. And in the shadows of that battlefield, betrayal sharpened its claws. The council ended with polite applause. But beneath the surface, unease rippled through the hall like cracks in glass. The monarch dismissed his nobles with a wave of his hand, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed caution. The lords bowed and retreated, their silken robes brushing against marble, their whispers sharp as knives. The princess remained seated, her hands folded on her lap. She had spoken little during the council, yet her silence had been louder than words. She knew the silver-haired lord was weaving traps with his tongue. He had praised her, yet buried warning in every sentence. She could feel the seeds of doubt being scattered. Subtle but dangerous. When the chamber emptied, the monarch leaned toward her. "They will not stop," he said quietly. "Already they test the edge of rebellion." She looked into his tired eyes. "And the people? Will they not see the truth?" "The people see what they are shown," the king replied bitterly. Whispers can blind just as surely as smoke hides fire. If the lords twist your image, they will turn hope into fear. That night, her heart was restless. She stood on her balcony, watching the torches flicker in the courtyards below. The moon hung high, serene and untouchable, yet her own thoughts burned with worry. She could hear faint laughter and music from the nobles' halls, but to her ears it carried menace rather than joy. The next morning, the test began. A rumor spread through the palace that the princess had defied the king in secret, that her bow had been an act of pride, not humility. Whispers grew like wildfire. Servants passed the story with nervous voices. Soldiers questioned it under their breath, and nobles smiled slyly as though they had planted the truth. The princess walked through the corridors as she always did, her gown brushing against the dew. Stone floors. She could feel the weight of stairs on her back, stairs that had once carried warmth but now carried doubt. Some bowed quickly, but others turned their faces away, unwilling to meet her eyes. She paused near the courtyard where soldiers trained. A group of them, young and scarred from battle, whispered together. One of them stepped forward awkwardly, his voice uncertain. "My lady, is it true?" Her heart ached at his question. She lowered herself slightly to his level, her voice soft but firm. "What you saw was no act of pride. It was sorrow for the people who suffered, for those who fell. That is all." The soldier's eyes flickered, torn between faith and doubt. At last he bowed deeply, whispering, "I believe you." Yet the doubt remained in the air like smoke, clinging to everyone who passed. The silver-haired lord watched from a distance, hidden in the shadows of an archway. His lips curled into a thin smile. The rumor had begun its work. Later that day, the princess was summoned again to the council. The chamber was colder than before, the nobles seated like judges rather than advisors. The silver-haired lord rose gracefully, bowing toward the throne. "Sire," he began, his voice smooth as silk, "we honor your daughter's devotion. Yet there are whispers among the people. They say her bow was not of humility, but of ambition. That she seeks to guide your throne, not support it." Gasps echoed faintly, though some faces nodded in agreement. The monarch's eyes hardened, but he did not speak. He waited. The princess rose slowly, her gown shimmering under the light. She did not shout, nor defend herself with anger. Instead, her voice was calm, clear, and steady. "If kneeling for the grief of our people is ambition, then I am guilty. If bowing to honor the fallen is pride, then I am proud. But I tell you this, I bowed not for myself, not for power, not for crowns. I bowed because silence for their pain would have been betrayal." Her words cut through the chamber like a blade. For a moment, no one spoke. Some nobles lowered their eyes, ashamed. Others clenched their fists, angered that her humility turned their lies into dust. The monarch finally rose. His voice carried power that shook the hall. "Enough! She is my blood, my daughter, and she carries more honor than many who wear gold in this room. Her bow was the soul of this kingdom. Any who twist it dishonor not only her, but every soldier who gave their life for this land." The hall fell silent. Even the silver-haired lord bowed his head, though his eyes glimmered with unbroken defiance. When the council ended, the princess left quietly, but her steps were heavy. She had spoken the truth, yet she knew whispers were not slain so easily. They would return, sharper, darker, more dangerous, that evening. As she walked the gardens alone, she paused by the fountain. The water rippled softly in the moonlight. She stared into it, her reflection wavering, her crown distorted. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder if she had placed the kingdom in greater danger, but then she remembered the soldiers' words, the people's blessings, the tears of the monarch. She placed her hand over her heart and whispered, "If truth is a burden, then I will carry it." From the shadows of the garden, unseen eyes watched her. The silver-haired lord lingered there, silent as stone. His thoughts were cold and certain. If words could not break her, then perhaps something darker would. The kingdom had found hope, but hope always drew enemies. The days that followed were heavy with unease. The bow that had once inspired awe now lived in two worlds, one of hope and one of suspicion. Among the people, stories of her humility still spread like fire through villages and markets. Mothers told their children how a princess had bent her head for the fallen, and soldiers swore they had seen the monarch himself moved to tears. To them, she had become the heart of the realm, but in the polished corridors of the palace, the whispers sharpened. The silver-haired lord moved like a shadow, his tongue weaving webs of doubt. Each conversation, each sly glance, each false smile, planted poison where trust had once grown. One morning, as the council assembled, the air was colder than usual. The princess entered with steady grace, her gown trailing like flowing silk behind her. She carried no crown today, only a simple band of gold across her hair. The nobles watched her carefully, their expressions a mix of curiosity and suspicion. The silver-haired lord rose slowly, his eyes gleaming. "Sire," he began, bowing toward the monarch, "a kingdom is not ruled by silence or by symbols. It is ruled by order, law, and strength." Yet whispers grow in the streets. They say the princess commands the people's hearts more than the crown itself. Is it not dangerous, I ask, when loyalty is divided between throne and bow? The words dropped like stones into the hall. Gasps rose, followed by murmurs. The king's jaw tightened, his hand gripping the arm of his throne. He did not answer immediately. The lord pressed further, his voice smooth and controlled. "We must protect the throne from unrest. I propose a test, public and clear, to prove the princess's loyalty. Let her stand before the people, not in ceremony but in trial. Let all see whether she bows to the crown or whether she seeks to wear it." The chamber erupted with noise, some shouting in protest, others nodding eagerly. The princess stood silent, her eyes steady, her heart pounding. She understood his game. He did not want truth, he wanted spectacle. He wanted her broken in front of the people. At last, the monarch raised his hand. Silence fell. His voice was low but heavy with command. "You would put my daughter on trial?" The lord bowed slightly, his lips curling into a false smile. "Not a trial, sire. A demonstration. If her heart is pure, then all doubt will vanish, and the kingdom will stand stronger for it." The king's gaze flickered to his daughter. For the first time, uncertainty clouded his eyes. He knew the lords pressed hard, and resistance might splinter the court. Yet allowing it felt like betrayal. His silence stretched long. The princess stepped forward, her voice calm but clear. "If they doubt me, then let them see me. I will not fear their judgment. For my loyalty has never been in question, not to the crown, not to the people, and not to you, father." Her words shocked the hall. Some nobles leaned back, surprised by her courage. Others smirked, believing her pride would soon undo her. The king closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. "So be it. Let the people gather. She shall stand before them, and truth will decide." The council ended, but tension thickened like storm clouds. That evening, in her private chamber, the princess sat near the window, gazing out at the darkened city below. The lights of the villages twinkled faintly in the distance, like stars fallen upon the earth. Her maid approached quietly, her hands trembling. "My lady," the maid whispered, "they are trying to trap you. If you face them, they will twist even your truth against you." The princess reached out, taking the maid's hand gently. "A trap only works if I hide from it. If I stand openly, then the people will judge for themselves. I bow not to whispers, but to hearts." The maid's eyes welled with tears, but she said nothing more. Meanwhile, in the secret halls beneath the palace, the silver-haired lord met with his allies. Candles flickered, casting their faces into shadows. "The stage is set," he murmured. "When she stands before the people, we will feed doubt into their ears. We will twist her words into chains. And when faith in her breaks, the throne will return to silence." His companions nodded grimly. Their plot was no longer hidden whispers. It was a storm prepared to strike. The day of the trial came swiftly. The palace square filled with people. More than anyone had expected. Farmers, soldiers, merchants, mothers, and children crowded together, their voices a sea of anticipation. Some came in love for the princes, others in curiosity, and a few in doubt. The air trembled with expectation. The monarch arrived first, seated on a raised platform. His crown shone in the sunlight, yet his eyes were weary, shadowed by the weight of what was to come. When the princess appeared, the crowd roared, some cheering, some whispering, some silent with suspicion. She walked steadily, her gown simple, her face calm. She did not raise her hands for attention, nor hide behind guards. She stood before the people as one of them, her eyes filled with quiet resolve. The silver-haired lord stepped forward, his voice loud enough to carry. "Here stands the princess who bowed before the throne. Some call it humility, others call it ambition. Today, she will speak for herself. Let the people decide which is truth." The square grew silent. Thousands of eyes turned toward her. The weight of the kingdom pressed down on her shoulders. She took a deep breath, her hands clasped gently before her. And as she opened her mouth to speak, the fate of her bow, her honor, and perhaps the throne itself, balanced on her words. The square was silent, a silence so deep it pressed against the chest of everyone present. The princess stood before thousands, her gown brushing lightly against the stones. The sun lit her face, but it was her calmness that drew every gaze. She looked not like someone on trial, but like someone who carried the weight of all those watching. For a moment, she closed her eyes. She remembered the battlefield smoke, the cries of mothers, the grief etched into soldiers' faces. When she opened her eyes again, they were clear and steady. She began to speak. "My bow was not for crowns or for thrones," she said, her voice firm but soft enough that the crowd leaned closer to hear. "It was for the people who carried this kingdom when war darkened our sky. It was for those who bled and for those who lost. I bowed because their pain deserved to be honored. If that is ambition, then I bow again today." Her words carried like a wave through the crowd. Murmurs of agreement rose, some weeping openly, others nodding with pride. But as the people reacted, the silver-haired lord lifted his hand, raising his voice with practiced skill. "You speak of the people," he said, his tone dripping with courtesy. "Yet you stand above them still, clothed in silk, crowned with gold. Do you suffer as they suffer? Do you toil as they toil? Words are easy, princess, but actions are harder." The crowd grew restless. Some frowned at his words, others nodded reluctantly. Doubt stirred again, like smoke rising after fire. The princess turned to him, her expression calm, almost sorrowful. "You ask if I suffer as they suffer," she said. "No crown can erase grief. No silk can shield a heart. I have wept as they have wept. I have lost as they have lost. And if honor means lowering my head to show their worth, then I will do so again before all of you." And without hesitation, she bent her knees on the stone floor of the square. She bowed her head deeply, her cloak spreading around her like a crimson sea dot. The crowd gasped. Silence fell once more. Then, from the edges of the square, a voice rang out, a soldier's voice, rough and broken. "She honors us," he shouted. Another voice followed, this time from a mother clutching her child. "She bows for us." Soon the square erupted, not with doubt but with cheers. Men and women shouted her name, not as royalty but as one of their own. Tears streamed down faces, hands lifted in blessing. The sound shook the air like thunder. The monarch watched from his seat, his eyes wide, his chest rising with a breath that seemed to lift years from his shoulders. For the first time in decades, he saw not fear in his people's eyes, but love. His hand trembled as it gripped the arm of his throne. The silver-haired lord's face tightened. His plan had been to break her, to twist her into pride before the crowd. Instead, her humility only deepened their faith. Still, he forced a thin smile, his mind already racing. He raised his voice again, trying to cut through the cheers. Words and bows are not enough. If she truly stands with the people, let her prove it. Let her walk among them without guards, without crown. Let her share their burdens not in words, but in life. The challenge hung in the air. The crowd hushed, waiting for her answer. The princess lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were calm, her face serene. If walking among my people proves my heart, then I will walk. I need no guards to shield me from those I love. Their lives are my life. Their burdens are my own. The people erupted again, louder than before. They shouted her name, chanting with joy, their voices shaking the square. The monarch's face softened, pride mingled with fear for her safety. The silver-haired lord bowed his head, hiding the fury in his eyes. Then so be it, he said smoothly. Let the princess walk among them, and let us see if her faith keeps her safe. The council was dismissed, the people still roaring with cheers. The princess stood tall, her gaze sweeping over them. She felt their love, their trust, their hope. But deep within, she also felt the shadow of danger. She knew the Lord's challenge was not offered in honor, it was a trap hidden in courtesy. That night, in her chamber, she sat by the window, the stars bright above. She thought of the journey ahead, of the people she would meet, of the dangers waiting unseen, yet she did not tremble. Her bow had begun a story she could not abandon, now far below. In the hidden chambers of the palace, the silver-haired lord met again with his allies. His voice was cold, his words sharp. If she walks among them, then she will walk into our hands. Let her believe in hope, we will show her the cost of it. And so, while the kingdom cheered her name, a darker plan moved forward in silence. The next morning, the palace gates opened. The princess stepped out, not in jeweled gowns, but in a simple dress of deep blue, a cloak draped lightly over her shoulders. No guards flanked her, no banners announced her path. Only the morning sun and the sound of curious voices greeted her as she began to walk among her people. At first, the crowd followed at a distance, unsure. Nobles watched from balconies, whispering with scorn or fear. But as she moved into the market square, faces turned toward her. Children peeked from behind their mothers, merchants paused in their sales, and old veterans straightened their backs. She smiled gently, her hands folded in front of her. She spoke not like a princess giving commands, but like a woman asking questions. She asked a farmer about his crops, listened to a widow speak of her lost son, and thanked a boy who offered her a loaf of bread. Though she had brought none of her own, her presence was disarming. The people expected distance from royalty, yet she showed them closeness. She touched their hands, looked into their eyes, and listened with patience. Each moment was small, but each built a bridge stronger than any speech. The square grew alive with whispers. She is here, among us, they said. Not on a throne, not behind walls. She walks as we walk. By midday, hundreds had gathered. Following her steps, some wept, others sang. The soldiers who guarded the streets watched with astonishment, for never had they seen the people so united around a single figure. But in the shadows of the crowd, danger moved. Men dressed as commoners slipped between stalls and doorways, their eyes fixed on her. They were not peasants but agents of the silver-haired lord. Their task was not to kill her, that would spark revolt, but to shame her, to turn the people's love into scorn. One carried a pouch of stolen coins, ready to slip it into her cloak and shout thief. Another carried poisoned words, ready to accuse her of false promises. They waited for the right moment, their instructions sharp and merciless. The princess reached the edge of the square, where a group of wounded soldiers sat on benches. Their arms were bound, their faces pale, their spirits weary. She knelt beside one of them, her hand resting lightly on his bandaged wrist. "You fought for this kingdom," she said softly. "I cannot heal your wounds, but I honor them. You are not forgotten." The soldier's eyes welled with tears. He struggled to rise, bowing his head deeply. The people watching gasped at his devotion. And before anyone could react, others in the crowd bowed too, one after another, until the square was filled with kneeling men and women. The silver-haired lord's agents stiffened. Their moment to strike slipped away as the people's hearts ignited. To accuse her now would bring fury upon themselves. Still, one man pressed forward, his hand on the pouch of coins. He stumbled intentionally near her, preparing to drop the pouch into her cloak. But before he could, a child rushed ahead, offering her a single flower. She bent down, taking it. With a smile, her cloak shifting out of reach. The man's plan failed, his hand clenching in frustration. Another agent raised his voice, shouting, "Words cannot feed the hungry." His accusation rang over the square. For a heartbeat, silence followed. The princess turned toward him calmly. She held the flower high, her voice steady. "This flower feeds nothing, yet it means everything. It is love freely given. The crown cannot end every hunger, but we can give honor, kindness, and truth. These things are not small. They are the roots of every harvest." The crowd erupted with cheers, louder than before. The agent shrank back, his attempt drowned in the tide of faith. High above, from a palace balcony, the silver-haired lord watched with narrowed eyes. His plan crumbled as the people's love deepened. He clenched the railing so tightly his knuckles whitened. "She grows too strong," he whispered. "If we cannot break her with whispers, then we must strike with steel." The princess returned to the palace at sunset, her steps slow but steady. Her cloak was dusted with dirt, her hands weary, but her eyes shone with quiet fire. She had walked among her people, and they had lifted her higher than any throne could. The monarch met her at the gates. He looked at her not as a ruler, but as a father, his eyes filled with pride and fear. "You gave them hope today," he said softly. She bowed her head. "Hope is not mine to give. It belongs to them. I only reminded them it still lives." But even as she spoke, shadows moved deeper. In the palace halls, the silver-haired lord's defeat in the square only sharpened his resolve. That night, in secret, he met with armed men. His voice was cold, his words final. "If the people see her as their heart, then we cut the heart out. Tomorrow she does not walk away alive." And so, while the kingdom celebrated, blades were being sharpened in silence. The morning sky was pale when the princess stepped once more into the palace courtyard. A hush spread over the gathered crowd, for word had already reached the city she would walk again among them. The people pressed close to the gates, eager for a glimpse, their voices full of hope. Yet unseen among them, danger waited. The silver-haired lord's agents had sharpened their plans like knives. This time, there would be no failed tricks, no clumsy rumors. They carried blades hidden in cloaks, and their eyes burned with grim purpose. Their orders were clear: end her life in front of the people, and twist the moment into chaos. The princess emerged, her dress plain once more, her hair tied simply behind her head. She carried no crown, no jewels, only the same calm grace that had already moved hearts. The crowd cheered, some reaching out to touch the hem of her cloak. She smiled at them, her hand raised not in command but in greeting. The monarch watched from his balcony, his chest heavy with worry. He had agreed to let her walk again, though fear gnawed at him. He knew whispers of danger swirled in the halls, Yet he also knew that forbidding her would shatter the trust she had built. His hands gripped the railing as he prayed silently for her safety. The princess moved deeper into the square, speaking softly with merchants, thanking mothers for their children's laughter, and blessing the old who bowed before her. She bent to lift a little girl into her arms, kissing her forehead gently. The crowd roared in affection, their love growing stronger with each small act. But from the crowd's edge, the assassins pushed closer. One slipped a dagger from his sleeve, his steps silent as he closed the distance. Another positioned himself to block the guard's sight, though few guards lingered nearby by her request. She had chosen to walk unprotected. The moment came when the dagger lifted, gleaming faintly in the sun. Gasps broke from those nearest as they saw the danger. Before the blade could fall, a young soldier lunged forward. He had been wounded in the war, his arm bound in scars, but his body moved with sudden strength. He threw himself between the princess and the assassin. The dagger struck his shoulder, blood spilling as he cried out. The square erupted. Shouts filled the air, the crowd surging like a wave. More assassins tried to press forward, but the people themselves blocked them, men and women grappling with cloaked figures, tearing blades from their hands. Soldiers rushed from the edges, their swords drawn, but it was the common folk who first shielded her. The princess knelt beside the wounded soldier, her hands pressing against his wound. Her eyes were filled with grief, but her voice was steady. "Hold on, your courage has saved not just me but all of us." The soldier, pale but smiling faintly, whispered, "I only did what you taught us. To bow is to honor." His words faltered as he lost strength, but his eyes shone with peace. The assassins were dragged down, their blades torn away, their cloaks ripped from them. Shouts of fury rose from the people, who demanded justice. And when one of the cloaks fell away, revealing the crest of the silver-haired lord sewn inside, the crowd roared in outrage. The monarch, seeing it from above, felt the truth burn through him. His jaw clenched, and his voice thundered across the square. "Seize them! Seize every man who dared raise a blade against her!" Guards surged forward, binding the assassins, dragging them toward the dungeons. The people cheered, their voices fierce with loyalty. They had seen with their own eyes who stood with them, and who plotted in the shadows. The silver-haired lord, watching from the far side of the square, felt his power slipping through his fingers. His eyes narrowed, his mind racing. But the crowd's fury was too great, their love for the princess unshaken. If anything, it had grown stronger. The princess rose slowly, her hands stained with the soldier's blood. She turned toward the people, her voice carrying despite the chaos. "This blood is not mine but ours. He stood for me as I stood for you. Let no blade divide us. Let no whisper turn us away from one another. Today we have seen that hope is stronger than fear." The crowd erupted with cheers, chanting her name, their voices shaking the earth. The wounded soldier was carried away with honor, the people vowing to care for him as one of their own. The monarch descended from his balcony, walking toward his daughter through the throng. When he reached her, he placed his hand gently on her shoulder. His eyes were wet again, but his voice was steady. "You have given this kingdom more than I ever could. You have reminded us all what it means to be human." The people bowed, not only to the king, but to her. It was not ceremony. It was not duty. It was love freely given, stronger than crowns or thrones. But even as the cheers shook the city, the silver-haired lord slipped back into the shadows. His heart was dark with rage, his pride wounded beyond repair. He knew his plot had been revealed. Yet he was not finished. Desperation now fueled him, and desperate men were always the most dangerous. The kingdom had stood together against blades, but darker storms still waited on the horizon. The palace had never been so alive. After the failed assassination, the people filled the streets with chants, their voices echoing like a song of defiance. They spoke not of fear but of courage, not of betrayal but of loyalty. Wherever the princess's name was whispered, it was wrapped in reverence, but inside the marble walls, shadows still lingered. The silver-haired lord had not fled far. Driven by desperation, he retreated into the old halls where tapestries hung heavy with dust and secrets. His pride was wounded, his schemes undone, yet his ambition burned hotter than ever. If he could not break her with whispers or steel, then he would tear down the very throne itself. That night, as the monarch convened his closest advisors, the princess stood at his side. The council chamber glowed with torchlight, but unease crept through its corners. The guards had captured the assassins, yet their tongues told the same story. All roads led back to the silver-haired lord. The king's voice was low but hard. He has betrayed his oath, betrayed his people. No crown can stand with such rot within its halls. The princess lowered her eyes, her voice steady. Then let truth end it, not revenge. The people must see justice, not vengeance. Only then will they trust again. Her words struck deep. The monarch nodded slowly, understanding. Then justice it shall be. The next morning, the throne room filled once more. Nobles gathered, soldiers lined the walls, and common folk pressed into the gallery above. At the center, bound in chains, the silver-haired lord stood with head held high, defiance burning in his eyes. The king rose, his voice carrying like thunder. You raised blades against my blood. You sowed lies among my people. You sought to break the heart of this kingdom. Speak now before judgment falls. The Lord's laugh was bitter. Your kingdom bows not to you, but to her. She kneels, and you follow. You are no king, she's the crown they love. His words cut through the chamber like a knife, and for a moment, silence fell. Every eye turned to the princess. The accusation was sharp, and even those who loved her felt their hearts tremble. Would she rise above the king, or stand beside him? She stepped forward slowly, her steps echoing across the marble. She looked not at the nobles, not at the people, but directly at the man in chains. You mistake love for power, she said gently. I never sought their throne, only their trust. I bowed because I am no greater than those who suffered. I will bow again not above my father, but beside him. And before the entire court, she lowered herself once more, kneeling at the monarch's side. Her cloak spread across the floor. Her head bowed deeply. The hall erupted, not in whispers, but in thunderous cheers. The people shouted her name and his together, no longer divided. They saw a king who had wept and a princess who had knelt, rulers bound not by pride, but by humility. The silver-haired lord's face twisted. His final weapon doubt was shattered before his eyes. His voice broke into rage. Fools, you cheer for weakness. You will burn for it. The king lifted his hand. His voice was calm, but iron lay beneath. No, my people will rise because of it. And you, who sought to tear it apart, will face the judgment of those you betrayed. The guards dragged the lord away as the hall shook with applause. His protests faded into the distance, swallowed by the roar of unity. When quiet returned, the monarch turned to his daughter. His voice softened so only she could hear. You saved not just me, but all of us. She lifted her head, her eyes shining with tears she did not try to hide. I only reminded them of what we all forgot, that crowns mean nothing without compassion. The king extended his hand, helping her rise. Together they stood before their people. The hall bowed as one, not out of duty, but out of love. That night, the city was alive with light. Torches burned in every street, not for war, but for celebration. Songs filled the air, children laughed, and bells rang from every tower. The princess stood on her balcony, gazing at the stars above. Memory of the bow, the soldiers' sacrifice, the people's voices, all of it filled her heart. She knew peace would never be easy, that storms would come again. But she also knew that the bond between crown and people was no longer brittle. It was living, breathing, unbreakable. The monarch joined her quietly, resting a hand on her shoulder. Together, they looked out over their kingdom, a kingdom reborn not by war, not by power, but by humility. And so the story ended where it began, with a bow. But this bow had not broken the throne, it had saved it.